Ah, oh, that's hot. That's hot.
We now return to your regular programming.
Yeah, it's really funny what the realness bring, cause everybody wanna kill the king. A couple snakes in the grass, I see them and they be slithering. To kill a mockingbird, will it sing? Yeah, and motherfucker, you could kiss the ring, and I get bread when I spill the beans. 2 birds, 1 stone, I know it can be bewildering. To kill a mockingbird, will it sing?
When you first think of the movie Scarface, it's fair to say that the word hero doesn't come to mind, or maybe you do, but the majority would definitely be saying goodnight to the bad guy at the end of the film. With that being said, I was just brushing up on my 3-story arc structure knowledge, and it dawned on me that the hero's journey is so much more prevalent than anyone even realizes. At the very least, the common moviegoer realizes. So I thought for a while on what unlikely movie could prove this point. I realized that most of my favorite movies could, but I stuck with the one that seemed the most likely to be controversial. Thus, here we are, ladies and gentlemen. There will be a little Easter egg fun fact hidden within the video. Let me know if you discover it. Okay, here comes the video in Scarface, the story of an unlikely hero's journey.
Entra. ¿Qué te pasa, no?
The first topic of discussion will be to explain the hero's journey, Archtype, first before even discussing the movie itself. This will be important to know because it will lay the foundation for the rest of the video, so in other words, pay fucking attention, please. The hero's journey is a narrative that has existed since the earliest hero story recorded, Gilgamesh. Yeah, according to National Geographic, it was made around 1800 BC. That's one old story. Excuse me, I use Google Scholar because I'm an erudite and am in the honors programs at my university. Just kidding, I didn't go to university. But to be official, you gotta usually have reliable sources for these kind of things. Anyways, for the sake of explanation of the archetype, we will use the most classic movie example of all time, in my opinion, Star Wars. Here's the best image I could find that overviews the hero's journey. No, I said hero's journey, god damn it! Wow. That probably just woke up some people, guys. Now there's this guy, Joseph Campbell, and long story short, he is the daddy of explaining the shit. So, we're using his overview. First step, the hero starts in the ordinary world, which is essentially whatever the setting at the start of the story is. Next step is simple, call to adventure. But yet the hero refuses the call.
You must learn the ways of the Force, if you're to come with me to Alderaan.
Alderaan? I'm not going to Alderaan. I've got to get home. It's late. I'm in for it as it is.
I need your help, Luke. She needs your help. I'm getting too old for this sort of thing.
One thing to note is that the storyline doesn't always have to follow these steps to a T to be considered a hero's journey, but typically the best results are yielded if one does. Next up is a big one, meeting the mentor. Now if you're thinking back on my example of Star Wars, then you'd be correct in thinking it's the legendary Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
Moving right along to creating the threshold, which basically means entering the special world, i.e. a setting that hero has never been in before and all the tumultuous endeavors that come with doing so. By the way, those tumultuous endeavors are the test, allies, and enemies, quote, step. Just think when Luke gets a crew of people and makes enemies with the Empire and all of their potato and glory. Next up, approach to the Dragon's Den, which really means entering the most dangerous area of the special world or the new setting. Here's another big step, the ordeal. Obviously, if you're entering the Dragon's Den, there's a dragon, so this is where the hero deals with the big and baddest person or thing holding them back from success. Up next, you guessed it, winning the ordeal and seizing the treasure. Now, something that isn't mentioned on the overview but is important to note is that upon seizing the treasure, it almost always comes at an immense cost. Usually the mentor dies, or someone dies, or it's just really mentally taxing. Spoiler alert for Star Wars. Okay, yeah, while Ben bites the dust to his former apprentice. Then there's the road back to the ordinary world. Now, remember how I mentioned the reward is usually done or received at a great cost? Yeah, for the return to the ordinary world, there's a phrase used. The hero returns having changed forever. The resurrection refers to the fact that the ordeal killed the hero we knew from the starting setting of the story, and is reborn as a new person, having as again, you guessed it, changed forever. Lastly, returning with the boon or gift, if you will, and this last step is typically the hero feeling like he doesn't want to go back to the special world or the previous ordinary world and wants to stay permanently in this new, better, ordinary world. Wrapping things up, as you can see, it's a circle, not a line, meaning that the cycle repeats itself, or at least can, over and over and over and over and over. For the sake of better time management and hopefully not losing viewership at this point, we will now delve right into proving that Scarface does indeed follow this archetype. Scarface follows this archetype nearly perfectly, starting with Tony Montana's call to adventure, arguably from his ordinary world, that being Cuba. Obviously, the call to adventure is Tony attempting to get into the United States, so I won't really go much into that stage. Now, a refusal of the call in this case to America is not refused by Tony, but by the INS officers. Of course, over time, he's given the opportunity to get into the country by taking out a former communist leader in Cuba. Meeting the mentor is described on movieoutline.com to be, quote, a crucial turning point where the hero needs guidance for whatever his needs may be at the time. This is best represented when Tony meets Frank, where he starts to receive counsel for not only the death of his brother during the Colombian drug deal, but also for how to get started in the cocaine business in America. This stage usually always takes up a good amount of screen time and is no different for Scarface. We have Frank's teachings, if you will, interspersed throughout many scenes, but I believe it is his talk with Tony at the Babylon nightclub that is most important. This sequence not only sets up Tony's start in cocaine dealing, but also foreshadows the rest of the movie, which we will come back to, so keep this in mind. Moving on to the stage that takes up the most of Scarface's runtime, test allies and enemies. For the sake of clarity, I will now define this stage as per Dan Bronzite of MovieOutline.com states. Now finally out of his comfort zone, the hero is confronted with an ever more difficult series of challenges that test him in a variety of ways. Obstacles are thrown across his path, whether they are physical hurdles or people bent on thwarting his progress. The hero must overcome each challenge he is presented with on the journey towards his ultimate goal. The hero needs to find out who can be trusted and who can't. He may earn allies and meet enemies who will, each in their own way, help prepare him for the great ordeals yet to come. This is the stage where his skills and or powers are tested, and every obstacle that he faces helps us gain deeper insight into his character and ultimately identify with him even more. Now that is in your mind, let's cover exactly what happens in the story during this stage, starting with showing that Tony proves worthy to rise up the ranks in Frank's cartel to become a trusted lieutenant, as IMDb puts it, who can now purchase drugs for him. Great. As you just read, the hero needs to find out who he can trust and... What the fuck? Oh my god.
We now return to your regular...
As you just read, the hero needs to find out who he can trust and are his allies and his enemies. The first person we see Tony truly trusts other than Manny is his sister Gina, when he visits his family. Moving along in this stage of the journey, Tony again is attempting to establish allies, and one of his first major obstacles, meeting with Sosa. Omar is proven to be an enemy because it is revealed by Sosa that he is an informant for the police. Omar is clipped in quite the dramatic way to Tony, but the two men are still figuring out, and do figure out, a way to do business with each other.
He was an informer for the police.
This scene shows the hero's negotiation skills, but also helps us identify with him more or less upon him talking about not breaking his word or his balls for anybody. We will consider Sosa an ally for Tony, but as you will soon find out, he will become the dragon. The last two plot points that fall under this stage are Tony's return to talk with Frank about the deal he established with Sosa, and Frank's hit on Tony.
You what? You made a deal for a fucking $18 million without even checking with me? Are you crazy?
Frank is upset because Tony negotiated a deal that he feels is favoring Sosa, and that Tony is getting too ambitious and Sosa is not a good ally. Frank being Tony's mentor, this proves to be his best and last piece of advice for Tony, our hero. Tony wants to keep furthering his allies, and in this case that would mean his marriage proposal to Olivera, which will of course not please her husband, Tony's mentor, Frank. One small thing to note is Gina's attraction to Manny, but this is not enacted upon by either side because of Tony's protectiveness of her. Tony is at the Babylon the same night Gina admits this. Now our hero, that very night, approaches the innermost cave, which is described as to, quote, represent many things in the hero's story, such as an actual location in which lies a terrible danger, or an inner conflict which, up until now, the hero has not had to face. As the hero approaches the cave, he must make final preparations before taking the final leap into the great unknown. At the threshold to the innermost cave, the hero may once again face some of the doubts and fears that had surfaced upon his call to adventure. He may need some time to reflect upon his journey and the treacherous road ahead in order to find the courage to continue. This brief respite helps the audience understand the magnitude of the ordeal that awaits the hero and escalates the tension and the anticipation of his ultimate test. End quote. All according to Dan Bronzite at movieoutline.com. Taking that into account, Tony's life is threatened the same night that Gina admits feelings towards Manny and barely managed to escape the heavy submachine gun fire as he fled the Babylon. Plot armor. This is the start of the approach to the innermost cave. Tony realizes it was his mentor, Frank, who ordered the hit on him, but may I add rightly so, for not only meddling in his marriage, but also his very lucrative cocaine business. Now comes the ordeal, which again I will define as using Bronzite's explanation. Quote, the supreme ordeal may be a dangerous physical test or deep inner crisis that the hero must face in order to survive, or for the world in which the hero lives to continue to exist. Whether it be facing his greatest fear or most deadly foe, the hero must draw upon all of his skills and experiences gathered upon the path to the inmost cave in order to overcome his most difficult challenge. Only through some form of, quote, death can the hero be reborn, experiencing a metaphorical resurrection that somehow grants him greater power or insight necessary in order to fulfill his destiny or reach his journey's end. This is the high point of the hero's story and where everything he holds dear is put on the line. If he fails, he will either die or life as he knows it will never be the same again. Mr. Montana, seeking retribution, goes to confront his mentor and kills him.
Manolo, shoot that piece of chip.
No, 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 no!
Well, has him killed. And also takes out Bernstein, a dirty cop taking Tony's bribe money, who I had not mentioned because he isn't that important, really.
Fucking punk. Son of a bitch. So long, man. Have a good trip.
Fuck you!
It is clear that his killing of his mentor, the one who started him on his path, is the ordeal because it goes tit for tat with the explanation of this stage in the journey. He must do it in order to survive or for the world in which the hero lives to continue to exist. This is why killing Frank and Bernstein is Tony's ordeal and leading us right into the reward. At this point in the video, if you're still with me, please consider subscribing for not only more film analysis, but future videos on solid topics and really any content I'll be putting out and leaving a like and a comment if you're agreeing with my theory of the hero's journey pertaining to the film. Okay, now back to the video. Seizing the treasure, or reward. This is shown through a very 1980s montage to the tune of Push It to the Limit. Long sequence short, Tony marries Olivia, gets all the money, power, assets it seems he really desires, other than the whole world. Now after Tony is triumphant and everything for our Cuban hero is in order, the road back begins for him. Traditionally, this is when the hero comes home with the reward. In this case, it is Tony maintaining this cocaine... Traditionally, this is when the hero comes home with the reward. In this case, it is Tony maintaining this cocaine empire, which he has forged for himself. But Tony will be tested, as all heroes are, with the penultimate stage of the hero's journey, typically referred to as the resurrection. Because I've been glossing over a lot of the plotline in favor for just covering what is completely necessary for supporting the theory of the hero's journey, I would just like to quickly summarize what has happened in the story leading up to the resurrection stage. Feel free to skip this part if you just care about the comparison to the hero's journey story arc structure. Remember that montage I mentioned? Yeah. The most important aspect to remember is Tony's relationship with Sosa during it, which of course was prosperous. Moving on past that, Tony and Olivia, but mainly Tony, become increasingly addicted to that good old white powder, causing his mental stability to deteriorate. On top of that, Tony gets busted for corruption and money laundering charges. Tony will probably have to serve at least 3 years in prison for tax evasion according to his lawyer. Sosa finds out about this and has Tony beat him in Bolivia with the other cocaine higher-ups and offers Tony a way out of jail. Awesome. Tony would need to kill a journalist in New York who is exposing the whole drug operation, and Tony agrees, although it is clear he does not want to kill a civilian who hasn't wronged him. Before the assassination on the journalist, Olivia and Tony split at a dinner where we have the famous line that I referenced at the start of the video, Tony is the bad guy of this special world.
So say goodnight to the bad guy. Go on.
They go to kill the journalist, but because the target also had his family in the car with him, Tony calls off the hit politely, but also arguably showing our hero's sense of morality. Moving on to the final act, Tony discovers that Manny had slept with Gina and blows him away where he stands, but comes to regret killing his best friend, especially after finding out they got married. Now we can return back to the story arc comparison. Finally, as we return from our little intermission, Tony is sitting at his desk while just doing what I will describe as just an absolute shitload of coke, and outside of that, Sosa's hit squad is storming his mansion. Gina encounters Tony about his unnatural love for her and is shot by one of Sosa's hitmen, who is then promptly dealt with by Scarface.
Come on, Tony. Fuck me, huh? Fuck me, Tony.
Gina!
Fuck me, Tony. Come on and just fuck me!
Following all of this, in the background of Gina's confrontation, Sosa's hitman had stormed the mansion. This is where the resurrection stage begins. Now I want to say this step started when Gina was firing at Tony, but it seems her shots were too indiscriminate to call it an actual take on Tony's life. According to Bronzite, this is the climax, in which the hero must have his final and most dangerous encounter with death, which I believe begins once he introduces us to his little friend.
Do you want to play rough? Okay. Uno. Say hello to my little friend. Okay. You want to play rough? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yolanda.
Another aspect of this part of the journey is the audience is meant to feel the hero's hopes, fears, and trepidation, which is quite visibly represented on Tony's face when he realizes how outnumbered he is during the preparation phase.
fucking with you. Yes! Come on. You wanna fuck with me?
Tony introduces us to his M16A1 rifle with an undermounted M203 grenade launcher and shreds an almost unbelievable amount of people and takes an unbelievable amount of damage coked out of his mind. Eventually all things must come to an end, and to the story arc structure surprise, but not the audience's, he is killed. This means the return with the elixir phase never occurs. That's where the hero returns back to the ordinary world, a completely changed person. But in this case, there's no return, which also isn't new. Heroes have been dying at the end of the films for a while, so this is a tragic ending. Unfortunately not a comedic one, but every plot point leading up to the resurrection made it clear that he probably wasn't going to make it out of this special world alive. Thus our hero's journey story arc ends, and I hope I have convinced you as well that the story arc structure was clearly used for this movie.
You think I'm coming with better? Get your fucking better! Get
Following this video, I'm sure you're going to notice the hero's story arc structure in film even more now, so go nuts comparing your favorite movies to it. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes my official video on why Scarface uses the hero's story arc structure to tell the story. I hope you enjoyed the video and stick around for all the future videos to come. You can make that official by subscribing right now, so support the channel to support the channel. Have a good day and leave me a comment. Here is the fun fact for those of which who have waited this long or skipped to this point. The hitman, which is named The Skull on IMDb, who kills Tony at the end of the film, is the same person who throws Omar out of the helicopter in Sosa's villa. One little fun movie detail that many people gloss over. Okay, let me know if you got here. This is Sid with Let's Make It Official, signing out.
Ooh, yeah, you know I'm a stoner. Smoking on that made my throat hurt. Ooh, yeah, you know that I got this. Always turn a problem to a profit. Ooh, hey, yeah, I do this every day. Yeah, I'm writing on this page, but I never stop to think about the drama that I bring. I just say what's on my brain, pack it up and then I bring it to the studio with music notes. I truly go insane, make that banger.